A big welcome to our More Foundation Podventure. This is our space where we will hear the life stories, insights and wisdom from members of our thriving community. You will get the opportunity to learn from their life experience and hear the moments in life that have helped shape them. Mo is a growing global community of change makers and builders. We provide lifelong learning support to our community, enabling them to make a positive change and impact in our world. To find out more about Mo Foundation, please visit our website www.mofoundation.com or find us on social media. We look forward to connecting and learning about you. In the meantime, enjoy the latest Podventure.
Welcome to the Mo Foundation podcast. My name's Darren Robson and I'm hosting this initial series for Mo. Today I've got Marc Winn with us. So Marc, welcome to the Mo podcast.
Good to be here. Hello, Darren.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation. It's completely unscripted, so I've genuinely got no idea where we're going to go, and I think that's really exciting. So Marc, why don't we start by you introducing yourself?
My name is Marc Winn. I live in the island of Guernsey, which is between England and France, a small self-governing state of 65,000 people, or there's probably a few more at the moment. And last 7 years, I've been a change maker focused on using small nations as a platform to change the world. And before that, I was an entrepreneur and I mentored many entrepreneurs. And I'm a dad, a husband. I have 3 kids, all under 10. So after just doing 6 weeks of lockdown, you can see that my hair is all over the place, but my eyes are tired, etc. Well, originally I was a direct marketer. I also, so I've been fascinated in terms of building systems at scale and persuading people at scale to transform. Within that journey, I think I spent a great deal of my life what I would describe in a glass box, screaming to try and be heard in some ways and not really understanding the way the world was compared to how it felt inside. And, in that process, I found my way out of the box through finding what my purpose was, which really, I think at the end of the day, I boil it down to supporting people to turn struggle into ease. And yeah, I think, and I've also during that period had, random things like creating which I think we may talk about today, which is creating a worldwide meme on the subject of Ikigai, which itself is an interesting story that 45 minutes of my life seems to have made more impact than the rest of it put together. And I'm retired. And I think I'm really at the crossroads in a new phase. I think as my focus in Guernsey was to make Guernsey the best place to live on earth by 2020, which in COVID, one could argue, given that we had 0 restrictions, that we were pretty close to achieving that goal. And now I think I'm fascinated at the moment at the intersection between how we live, and how we raise our kids and things like that. And so the concept of it takes a village to raise a child, and we've shifted as a society towards living in individual units of houses, and loneliness is exploding, mental health is exploding, etc. But our biology is designed to be in village. And so I'm fascinated in terms of how do we redesign the way we live to reconnect with the tribes we're supposed to be part of. And Mo is a good tribe.
Nice plug there for Mo, which is great. So one of the things that I really want to do with this is Mo has become, because of people like you and others, it's exploded beyond my wildest dreams in lots of ways, and it's so incredible. And part of what I want to do is I really want to showcase the incredible talent and ambassadors and people that just get what Mo's trying to do, and are really part of helping to shape and form it. And you really are absolutely at the kind of core of that community and group. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to kind of unpick a bit more, because you've always been, I think you and I have always had fascinating conversations and often come from things from slightly different perspectives, and sometimes very different perspectives. And then sometimes
you like to work hard.
yeah, sometimes very aligned. Yeah, no, I do like to work hard. Although, you know, my life in the last 2 years has kind of slowed down because of COVID and all sorts of different things. And so I've had to kind of dwell more in your world, which has been interesting. But I don't think it's quite your world, you know, I think.
Well, actually, you know what? Mine really didn't change that much. Yeah, I mean, there's arguments whether I knew it was coming or what, but we're in the great pause, which for the restless many is an interesting time to be with one's own wisdom or lack thereof.
I've been doing I've just, you know, what's kicked me off in podcasting. I've wanted to do this for 2 years and just haven't got round to it. And
Not at the time.
no, it was just I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. It wasn't about time. It was like I just wasn't ready. I was scared of the technology. It's like, oh, don't let me near that technology. Yeah, no, but it's so interesting because I've interviewed 9 people for the AC, so the Association for Coaching podcast on health and wellbeing, and 3 people mentioned this social experiment that was done around mindfulness. And what they did was they put men and women in a room for 15 minutes that just had nothing in there other than basically something that could give you an electric shock. 75% of men gave themselves an electric shock. And I'm like, I'm one of those men. And there was one guy that pressed it nearly 300 times in 15 minutes. And I'm like, I'm probably that guy. I'm probably like, oh no, that's a bit of stimulation. Give me like, because mindfulness and just slowing down for me has just been not for me. Like if I go running, then that's my mindfulness. If I'm sitting by a lake and watching fish and nature, then that's my mindfulness. But just sitting there and being mindful and thinking about my thinking, I'm like, or breath, I'm like, nah, it's not for me. It's not for me.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to make it easy. Passive mindfulness is often quite difficult for a lot of people. But I mean, ultimately, there are, as you described with running and fishing, there are more active ways to quieten the mind.
Yeah, well, definitely, and it's. I went to I went to Osho Center in India, so I got fascinated with Osho probably about 10 years ago now, and just that guy was just incredible. You know, a person that talks about non-attachment, and he's got 10 Rolls Royces and all this land and 15 or 100 gold Rolexes, and I'm like, you're just such a wonderful paradox. And what I found there around meditation is they had this thing called dynamic meditation, and it was dance basically. So I think that's my excuse for why in my sort of late teens, early 20s, I loved raving, you know, because actually it was meditation. That was definitely a sense. And I think with you, I mean, one of the things that always fascinated me is like you spend your life having coffees with wonderful people, and you're one of the most incredible connectors I've ever met in my life. It's just it's fascinating to me how, you know, the people that you've connected with, all the great, you know, you've connected with all sorts of different types of people. But before we get into that piece, and then I'd love to kind of hear where you are right now and what some of your insights are from this sort of COVID period. Talk to me about Mark growing up, because part of what we want to do in this podcast is kind of get to the essence of why do people do what they do. So talk to us about, you know, your upbringing, and I'm assuming that was on Guernsey. Is that where you grew up? Because I've never asked you that.
Yeah, I mean, I was born here, but I spent a lot of time traveling around the world, and particularly spent a lot of time in Africa, because my dad has been 50 years working on and off in Nigeria. So it's interesting. And you know, he was someone who left school at 14, dyslexic from a working class background, made something of himself out in Africa, and so I grew up in a tax haven from a wealthy situation, but also spent a lot of time in some of the poorest places in the world. And I think, you know, so you have someone with no education that is more successful than most of the people with education. And then you also grow up questioning some of the consequences of wealth as well as the opportunities. And what I really remember about Nigeria, in particular when I was growing up very young, is the profound joy that exists there with people with nothing. And what I noticed the most in the West is kind of the profound malaise that exists, or the dissatisfaction, the restlessness that exists um, in society, and I couldn't square the circle. And so you go to school, everyone says, get a good education, make a lot of money, and I couldn't buy into it. And so, the glass box I described, none of it made sense because all of my influences were conflicting. And so I grew up questioning. And I think I grew up with people saying, Mark, you're lazy, Mark, you're this, that, the other, conform. And something in me just couldn't. And so I've always been kind of a mischief maker, a nonconformist. I always did enough to get to the next stage because I like the social life. So I'd always, last day pass my exams with the minimum amount of work. And just, go to university. I've done 2 degrees, got A-levels, GCSEs, and I never really worked that hard because I was always looking about what was the minimum effort to put in just to get to the next stage. Whereas most people were in the narrative of work as hard as you can to get to the next stage. And I think in doing that, I had a real gift for decoding systems rather than with questions, rather than just being spoon-fed by them. I think I grew up questioning everything, and I grew up. There's supposedly this, I think, what I would call soul connection that I was more aware of, or soul disconnection that I was more aware of because of those contrasts. And I think the other thing is that I grew up fat and ginger in an all boys school, and I was never a fighter. So I developed a wit and a way of finding weakness in others as a self-protection mechanism, and I think I used to use that skill for defense, of finding weakness in people. I've actually learned to use to supporting people with challenges and surfacing challenge and tension, like your restlessness.
We'll get to that later.
Being able to softly presence it in conversation rather than use it as a weapon to defend, right? Yeah, so my skill of surfacing tension and edge and things like that, I think, came from the playgrounds. And I think as you go through in life, you start to realize that the link between karma and dharma, as they say, so my past and how it influences my future direction and my purpose, which is, there's something profound about that experience of verbal dog eat dog that's really helped me to do what I do and become what I am now. And so I've always had to use my voice to do things rather than my fists, and because these hands have never done a day's work in people's lives. And so I'm not, I think you grew up in the more street fighting part of thing, so
well, yeah, but I was really useless at that as well. So but it took me a lot more thumps before I realized it.
Yeah, and I suppose I was always able to walk the edge without being thumped. And I think that comes from growing up as well. Well, let's say there's kind of a fair bit of drinking in the family household and things like that, and so knowing when you're dealing with small and large, you just got to be tuned in to people's edges and things like that. And I've always been hyper aware of how far I can push someone before the fists come out. And so and my 9-year-old is an absolute genius edge walker as well, and I'm kind of getting it back.
That's called karma, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And so it's I really I think one of the things that you get older is you learn to accept your past and your story more, and it will learn to accept yourself more. And that's part of where the ease arrives. And so I've developed a profound love for my story, and now I understand its meaning and its role and in my gifts, and my joy. And whereas at the time I may have not had some of those perceptions, and so the contrast between of rich countries and poor countries, the contrasts of the challenges and of being told I was X, Y, and Z. I deeply appreciate all of that now because it's contributed to who I am and what I do and or don't do. And 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 it's allowed me to find peace and acceptance, and that as a mechanism for moving through life. Has turned the definition up considerably.
It's great to meet someone who's finally found their zen.
I wouldn't say that. My 9-year-old, as I previously described, can discover my edges, and my wife as well. Actually.
Good to hear. It's really good to hear. Gives me some satisfaction. No, I'm kidding. And before we get to Mark as he is here today, there was also a period after your schooling and after your education, university. You did become an entrepreneur, didn't you? And again, we've never really deep dived into that conversation, but you were in the sort of health and well-being space. So talk to me about that entrepreneurial experience and that stage in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I came back from university. My brother had been setting up a business for a year before I'd finished. And my brother's 7 years older than me, and he said, "Oh, can you come and help me with some IT stuff for a week after you've done it?" Because he was building some systems or something, and he had no understanding of technology, and I had some understanding, but not. I'm not a programmer or anything like that. I'm just not terrified of it, as you described. Whereas most people in that era were terrified of it. And I came just to support him with some stuff, and then after a week he said, but I was planning on, I don't know what I was planning on doing, traveling or doing nothing. And then he said, stay. And I said, or what? And then he said, well, or I won't speak to you. And, and then we have a funny relationship. And then so we really spent 10 years building businesses with funding and support from family. So you have very young people with no experience, with the ability to have the resources to learn. But I suppose the thing in that period, which having resources from family came with its own benefits, but also stresses and challenges. And so we ended up building out of all of the 10 different businesses that emerged from that We'll Try Everything. One ended up being relatively successful, which was a direct marketing company selling vitamins and health supplements. So in Guernsey, the number 1 and 2 in the industry came out of our community, and that pretty much took over the whole market at the time. And so we grew from 0 to 1 million customers in 10 years, and then sold to our competitor. But I think the interesting thing in that process is, my brother was driven, hardworking, relentless. He still can be. And I was really, taking the labor out of the system, and systems and architecture and strategy and all of those things. But actually, I really struggled with doing the day-to-day aspects of running a business. So, to learn about me, I'm profoundly productive over a decade, but deeply, seemingly like I'm not going anywhere day to day. And I think that can be quite challenging working in a 9-to-5 environment. But I think, it was a project over a decade, and my role in that was significant, primarily because it was, building the architectures of what it takes to create a successful organization. And then since then, we sold in 2008. It was a debt-backed deal just before the crash. So, so much of this is about luck and privilege, as well as work. And then after that, I mentored my first entrepreneur around about the same time. He was a coffee roaster, and that was really and I'd never really drank coffee before then. And I was hooked. I realized I could do the bits that I'm good at, which is supporting people who are in businesses to turn struggle into ease. And I could be there, with them an hour a month, or rather than, going against my soul by being there day in, day out, dealing with the day-to-day issues. I could be in that Covey quadrant of unurgent and important with the people I spent time with, and I could live that whole time in supporting people to build businesses that make them thrive. And I probably had 2 nervous breakdowns in the 10 years, primarily because I was working against who I am and not fully being in my gift, and the stress of being someone I'm not was a challenge. And so I could literally hang out with dozens and dozens of people and support. As I always say, the first hour with me is brilliant. if I spend more than an hour with you, then a month it starts to get destructive. So I just really restructured my life around always being in service in that first hour of my brilliance, and not exposing myself to the next weeks in businesses, and so I could keep a hugely varied existence. But I also had the money after the sale to take some time off to explore my why and travel around the world and explore all of the build the network of really interesting people that you describe that are solving all sorts of challenges in all sorts of different ways, and then be of service to those guys in the process. But it was a profound 10 years. It was really demonstrating that you can really build something, but it was also demonstrating the consequences of not building in alignment with who you are. And I became really passionate about what I would call aligned entrepreneurship, which is having business owners build organizations that are slaves to them rather than the other way around, which a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs are slaves to their business. Even if they monetarily are successful, they never feel successful because they're ultimately doing it for the wrong reasons, in pursuit of some story that isn't them. And whilst I was successful in many people's eyes, it wasn't in my own image. And so really 12 or 13 years since then, I've really been on a journey to be who I am, one cup at a time, and tune into building a model of success that feels true to me. In essence, I'm more artist than engineer, and I was building as an engineer, and I think these days, art and alchemy and creating for the sake of creating rather than because it needs to have some kind of purpose or outcome, or is efficient, or all of those things, where it makes sense by today's conventional standards. Because I'm going back to the village in Africa. Profound joy is available with nothing in the village going anywhere. So the Western construct seems like a very long way around to get to something we innately know as toddlers.
Yeah. There's that lovely story of I don't know where it is, but it's kind of it doesn't matter which country the person comes from, but an entrepreneur turns up in Africa and he sees a beautiful vista and view, and he says to the fisherman, well, why don't you get more boats and create a business and everything else, then you can have all this. And he's like, well, I've got all this, why would I need to build a business to get what I've already got? So it kind of reminds me of that lovely story, that lovely anecdote.
Yeah, it never has this been reflected more in COVID. Actually the fastest way to deal with COVID as a world is to all go inside at the same time for 2 weeks, right? Or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And just be on our own, be in peace. But because of this drive to be the entrepreneur on the beach, we can't get rid of it. And we're really being called to be the guy on the beach, to deal with issues like climate change and etc. Or biological disruption, the era of biological disruption, as I call it, that which COVID is the beginning of. We need to find meaning in periods of solitude, and I think that people like Nelson Mandela. Interesting if you read his book. I was fascinated by Viktor Frankl as well. How did those guys find such meaning and grace in 27 years of solitary confinement? So, when I'm frustrated or in lockdown or whatever, I'm really saying, how do those guys transcend that experience and find a form of meaning and grace that isn't available in inverted commas the pursuit of life?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll get to some of those pieces in a minute. I just want to delve a little bit further into 2008. The business, you've sold it. You're now at this point. You go, actually, I'm going to go out into the world and start looking.
It was more, I've actually got some cash to go and just have fun. And I got married, and my wife and I been together since we were teenagers. But I didn't really commit to that until I had my own financial freedom from the family, and then an exploration of traveling around and learning about things I was interested, which in that period was a lot about consciousness or transcendence, and also technology or mental health for other people's, and technology and biotech and AI and all of these kind of things that are hitting us now. I was learning about these things in 2013. Also became interested in social movements and all of these kind of things. So the pieces of, I think, leverage and learning how to do things at scale whilst keeping life human became, I think, the area of my exploration and research, and whilst being fascinated in individual and collective potential. So at the same time I'm mentoring and supporting people, I'm also learning about all of these tools and levers and consequences of the things we're building in the world. So it was a time to make the learning curve really steep again, like it was at the beginning of entrepreneurship. In the early days of building a startup, the learning curve is really steep and fun, and you really feel excited. And towards the end, it's like building a machine that you're tweaking and and optimizing. Whereas we're in an era of so many new things are exploding, new consequences are emerging, and there was a period where I really wanted to create a steep learning curve for myself, and it was a self-curated decade-long MBA whilst living in day-to-day service of others who are struggling with where they were.
So where in that period, because I think you and I got connected when you were starting to form Dandelion Project, you were starting to bring the TEDx to Guernsey. So where did your concept of making Guernsey the best or the greatest place to live, where did that come from? When did that sort of moment emerge from within you and from the group that you were around at that time?
I look back at my email and I think originally I was, my best man's late father set up a political group. I was always fascinated by the Apollo program and how they'd used a bold mission to create what I sensed was collective alignment. I love the old wives' tale about the janitor being asked what they were doing on that program, and they said they were working to put a man on the moon, and how an extraordinary amount of innovation happened that's only really to this day starting to be surpassed, because no one's really putting men back on the moon. We're only developing the innovation to actually have that happen again, and this was in the 60s I think it was the 60s. So I was extraordinarily captivated by how that a bold vision created that kind of mass alignment that allowed a lot of innovation to happen in a very short space of time, as COVID has, in another way. And so what I could see in Guernsey, where I live, was all of these people fighting over the crumbs because the island didn't have purpose and didn't have a mission. And I said, this could be the best place to live on Earth if everyone just tried. I was mulling over this idea of purpose and places having purpose. And then I think I was exploring people like Pam Warhurst, who's a great friend now from Incredible Edible, who started to use mischief. And I was reading books like Join Me by Danny Wallace, where he created a movement of 40,000 people without ever telling anyone what it was, and started to understand kind of bottom-up mischief building. And another great community builder called Jason Roberts, who built something called Build a Better Block, where they just started improving where they live without permission, because I was trying to persuade people to create this vision in coffees and things like that, and everyone was like, yeah Mark. So I became fascinated in permissionless models for transformation. And but I at the same time I'd set up this coffee group in Guernsey called Loafers Inc. It was a coffee group I set up at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning for self-employed people to remind themselves why. And so it was an act of mischief. I just arranged this weekly coffee gathering and invited kind of self-employed and small entrepreneurs that I knew to hang out and do nothing on a Monday morning at 10 o'clock when everyone else was miserable and running around. And we'd sit in the cafe and see all the wage slaves, passing up and down and things like that. And we were just chewing the fat and talking about life. And then one week, Jock, who is my co-founder at Dandelion, turned up. We were the only two that turned up one week. And he'd been for the first time the week before, but he was at the other end of the table and we'd never had a conversation. We just said hi. And we were sat outside on a sunny day in May. I think it was in 2013. First ever conversation. And and I said, and we were like kind of, brothers from another mother, really like telepathic from the first conversation. And I revealed to him, as I'd revealed probably 50 times in coffees before, that I've got this crazy idea to make Guernsey the best place to live on earth. And he was the first person that ever said, yeah, let's do it. And everyone else had dismissed me as Mark as being ridiculous. And I've had a lot of that in my life. And he was the one, without blinking, he said, yeah, let's do it. And he got it straight away. And we both had an amazing conversation about life as we were watching in this beautiful sunny day that no one could see because they were walking back and forth to work being unhappy in the Paradise Island. I said, this is the best place to live on earth. We just have to come up with a way of getting people to believe what's already here, right? And Jock's an event producer by day, and I've had this amazing network by day, and so we hatched a plan to kind of steal the TEDx brand and set up a TEDx conference and flip a movement off the back of it. And so as an act of mischief, so that, because TEDx would bring the imaginal selves within the community together, and you were at that very first event speaking. I was considering leaving the island because I wasn't really connected to the people that I was traveling around the world to see. The people that would hear me and have those conversations and say, yeah, let's do things. Whereas in Guernsey, it was, people were still quite attached to the current ways. And then in that conference, 100 people showed up, and they were all the people that felt lost and alone, that wanted those conversations and wanted to build things. And, I remember we had 15 people or 12 people on stage, and you were one of them. And people in that room got captivated and found purpose that day and found meaning that day, and then started building projects to improve our community. And and Mo has the highest density of Mo coaches in the world, I would think, by a distance. And out of that ecosystem has come wave after wave of interesting and innovative project. And the direction of the country has changed towards happiness and well-being as the primary motivator, and just as important as wealth creation, which in terms of our overall COVID strategy, you would see that we chose life and well-being ahead of the economy. And ironically, that's meant our economy has done far better than everyone else, but the culture of the place has changed. And so I think if we look at the mechanism, we've used mischief, connection, fun, inspiration to hack a purpose, to hack the culture of place without ever asking permission. And just through having events, which really all an event is showing another human being did something that they felt called to do. That then inspires another load of human beings to do something that they feel called to do. I remember Jock and I were quite captivated in the beginning, is because we didn't realize that all of these people wanting to do things existed in the community, and that they were waiting for permission. And it wasn't that none of this wasn't here already, because the ideas were all there in community. And so we created this permission granted stamp in the beginning and used to just go around giving people permission to do things that they didn't need, because we're all waiting for teacher to say this or waiting for mum and dad to say that. We've been culturally conditioned to wait for permission, and I suppose I'm not one of those people, and Jock wasn't either, but we didn't realize how many people were and how people were trapped in their own box, because I grew up questioning, as I describe it, where most people did what teacher says, and how we supported people across that bridge, conversation at a time. And so, the genesis point was, so here it is. The genesis point was coffee about doing nothing on a Monday morning. And it was a community that valued space and the void and the act of gathering. And that triggered kind of one of the most ambitious projects to happen in my community. And so it really kind of highlights the value of being and doing, I think, and the space where creativity and connection arrives is, the world kind of moves at the speed of trust now. And, I'm fascinated between how that trust is cultivated and how that mycelium of community, the invisible web of connections that helps communities live into their potential. And so, after 6 years of doing that, I think social cohesion, what is the essence of social cohesion and how do you weave it at scale? and mechanisms like Mo and dozens of others start to bring community closer together. They deepen trust. They're what needed at the moment, which is to reconnect the social fabric when we have so much algorithmic separation and loneliness, disconnection and separation and lack of trust happening at global scale, which is starting to dismantle our democracies and our systems and things like that. And so fundamentally, we need now mechanisms to bring us all back together. And one of the, I think everybody's been through Mo understands the sheer bonds and deep connections and trust that builds up when you see people as who they truly are. So it's a byproduct of the process. But if we think about that in how do you scale the impacts of people living in isolation, how do you scale the impacts of algorithmic dystopia? How do you seed in the antidotes to that viral separation that's happening? You start to see the mechanisms that we see day to day in terms of reweaving the social fabric back together, reweaving the village back together. You start to understand that the role of connection, trust, and purpose has in global health and global survival at one point. And so, again, that balance between connection and leaving people behind. And so what we have is an awful lot of people in the world that have left behind. And in this global pause, we're starting to realize that we have to, I remember a friend of mine in Guernsey who also spoke at, Toby Birch, who also spoke at that first, talked to me about the Black Death and said, the peasants got a pay rise after the Black Death because the wealthy people suddenly realized they needed everyone around them. And what the wealthiest countries are finding that and COVID kind of moves and feeds in the places of great disconnection. So every country is being shown its mirror, and COVID kind of preys on the mirror. And the most cohesive societies are doing the best. The ones that leave people behind the least, or so in Singapore, it being the labor camps, in the US it was racial inequality. And so it's understanding that, and this is kind of the beginning of chaos, that an era of chaos, that the more we can't do this individually, we have to move to the next phase of humanity collectively. And so, it became pretty clear to me, in the early part of the last decade that we need to reweave society back together. Otherwise, my children were going to face a pretty damaging future through the lens of individualism alone. And then in that, saw that small nations had a significant role in terms of developing the mechanism for governance, for human thriving, whereas clearly, as you can see from the UK and US and things like that right now, the governance is a challenge when you're dealing with asymmetric risks like viruses or algorithmic issues of Facebook, and we start to understand that where everybody's got their point of view, but nobody's listening to each other, right? And so this is where things like Mo is, because everybody's taught to speak and nobody's taught to listen, and everyone has such polarized views. And if you look at Republicans and Democrats or something like that, it's a speaking fest. Meanwhile, viruses, where what we actually need is a listening fest. So it's interesting. Whereas something like Mo democratizes listening, and that's what builds the mycelium of community and starts to reweave the fabric back together.
Oh, it's fascinating. I could listen to you all day when you get into that sort of philosophical space. It's always just like, the ideas, as you can see the mind map I'm drawing here, which I will take a picture of at the end so people can see what I'm doing. It's, it's fascinating. And I really love what you shared there around prioritizing life over the economy. And if I put my hand up, I will put my hand up and say that there was a real part of me, and I know you and I had a bit of a spat over, I can't remember what communication it was, but we were just sort of discussing it, because I was very much, at the start of it, I was like, we're going to fuck the economy if we close down and lock down. And guess what? 400 billion pounds. We've managed to do that. Well done. Biggest national debt and deficit since World War II. Brilliant. Well done us. 68 billion, I think I just saw, spent on that kind of track and trace system. So anyway, that's happened. And I was very much at that point, I was in that space of, there's very much a virus and it's killing people, right? That's very evident, and it's killing a certain population, which happens to be the elderly. And absolutely, we need to protect them, and we need to isolate them. And actually, I could see it wasn't impacting the younger generation. With 3 young kids like you, it's like I could see it wasn't impacting them. So I was thinking, that's good, okay. And I know that they can pass it on to others. But I was very much in that. I was in that headspace of let's kind of isolate and let the vulnerable stay away, and let's let the rest of the economy go. And I got it wrong. I'm putting my hand up and going, now with the fullness of a year of experiencing it and seeing what Guernsey has done and seeing what New Zealand has done and see what Australia has done. I called it wrong. I was calling it wrong. And absolutely, there was a bias towards not just the economy, because it wasn't just as simple as the economy from my perspective, Mark. It was also about mental health and well-being, because of the struggles, that we were talking about before about
living with your mind, right?
Yeah, you can't sit with yourself.
Electrocution.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Netflix or
yeah, completely. Don't put me in a room for 15 minutes and let me think about what I'm thinking about, because actually I need some stimulus. It's like actually very much.
Well, what New Zealand and Australia and Guernsey have done is we're still in lockdown.
Yeah.
We locked down the whole time, but we chose to lock down as a village.
Yeah.
Right. And this is you cannot solve this through individualism. So individual lockdown or every person for themselves, right? Those are the two polarities, but there's something in the middle, which is the village mindset, which is what you're seeing. And it's hard to understand Guernsey or New Zealand in the beginning, because you're seeing, the individual for themselves or the lockdown and isolation from the polarity of an individualist community like the UK. And there is, but the thing in the middle is the village. And so the strategies, which is both where the intersection of good for health and economy comes, because the top factors in health are purpose and connection. But they're also the top factors, I think, in long-term economic growth. And so, and that's probably why it was hard to see, is because you're in the lens of two individual solutions, which is lockdown individually or every person for themselves. You can't see the solution in the middle.
Yeah.
And that solution only emerged as an opportunity in New Zealand and Guernsey and places like that, because they were so intolerant of death. They locked down so quickly and so hard and did everything from a death point of view. Did the opportunity of elimination emerge? Not Jacinda Ardern or our leaders, none of them talked about elimination in the beginning, but it was a dividend on doing the right thing as quickly as possible. And something emerged through that, rather than having this fear or restlessness about what if we lost all the money.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it wasn't just about the fear of losing money. It was. There is a lot of people that we've not been able to support. There's a whole massive group of people that run businesses, and the poor have only got poorer, as we're starting to see from that evidence. I think it was that sense of actually let's kind of look after the elderly and vulnerable. Not that we can completely identify who those are, because this virus will just be slightly indiscriminate, although the data doesn't suggest that. It does say that there's certain types of people that have got more of a prevalence for it. And it was like, let the rest of us just get on with keeping the village going. So I never lost the sense of the village. I really don't. I never lose the sense of that interconnectedness. But it's like, there's my alarm. I don't know what that's for. That's just to show this is live and not planned. I'll share what that is. I'm on a health kick, and you were talking. We can talk about weight loss later, maybe, because I know you've really looked after yourself. But no, I'm very much in that sort of looking after myself space. So I'm on a fast. So that was my 16-hour fast comes to an end. So now I can eat like a hog. I can consume my whole body weight in whatever I want. No, that's not true. So no, that's what that is. That's just telling me, you're allowed to eat again now. So back to COVID. So it was just like, let's let the economy and let the people that are healthy to kind of crack on with it. That was very much where my mindset was, we've seen that different economies and there's different dynamics in those different economies. And I'm not saying, I'm an expert or you're an expert in it. It's like, there's still lots of lessons that we've got to learn, because I think when we get into I get you into that sort of future gazing, which I will do later on. I'm sure there's more of this to come. You were talking about some of those challenges. I do want to capture that. I do want to get that. So, and I think it's amazing what you've done with the collective team and Dandelion. I really do. And so just so we close off that phase of Dandelion. So where's Dandelion now from yours and Jock's perspective? Where is it at? Is it kind of like the sort of silent positive virus, permission grants, or is it sort of in that space?
I mean, so here's the thing. It was always set up as a 6-year project.
Mm-hmm.
It was the event that you went to was March the 13th, or in 2014. It was a 6-year project to make Guernsey the best place to live on earth. So the end of that project was March the 13th. And our first COVID case hit March the 9th, and this new meme in Guernsey emerged around about the 13th called Guernsey Together. And it really was the genesis of the community response, which was this story around collectivism and togetherness and that Guernsey Together branding really captured the essence of what the community was. So in essence, I think Dandelion was always supposed to be a temporary catalyst. And, I think it effectively died that day. Guernsey Together emerged because it was no longer necessary. And as you know, in coaching, the best thing about coaching is to no longer be needed in the coaching process, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I think we've had 2 lockdowns in Guernsey. We had an outbreak recently, and with the first outbreak, I remember campaigning to get people in faster than we were doing, or to create and I also remember campaigning for things like masks and stuff like that. And this second lockdown happened within. They got the test results on the Friday afternoon at 4:00. They went round to the people's houses and retested them in the afternoon. By 8 the next morning, they told the island. By 9, the whole island was social distancing, and by 12, the whole island was in full lockdown, and everyone was wearing masks. So they did it in less than 24 hours. So like, I'm a spare part in this community. Like, my role is not needed anymore because they get it. Right? Everybody's get it. And in many ways, I don't feel like I've done anything because it's not me really doing anything. It's everybody's standing into. And Jock's found his passion within soil, and I think my emerging passion is the village. And I remember being in that lockdown and looking. I had this I was taken back to a memory of sitting with the nomads at the end of our garden in Nigeria, and waking up the next morning, I had this vision of all the fences falling down between our houses, and reconnecting with that energy of the village. And I really feel that what Dandelion's purpose was for those 6 years has either moved on or something else is emerging. I haven't really decided how that is logistically, but I sense that at the community level, we've done really well in Guernsey. And I think individual transformation, I think it's really interesting. But what I remain fascinated is the bit in between, which is I've got 3 kids. It's overwhelming raising 3 kids on your own in a house. We're designed to live and be raised in a different way. One of the reasons why we're putting on weight as parents is because it's like intense, right? Living in that duality of individual household versus mission and things like that. And we've got an amazing community that holds us at the town level or country level. What I'm really interested in for the next phase of my life, and whether that comes with Dandelion or the Village Project or any other name, is how you're held in raising kids. Before I started Dandelion, I was interested in building a school, but then people didn't want to take a risk with their children at the time. And then I realized you needed to change the village to raise the child before you can change education. So really, Dandelion was a product of how do you change the village to raise the children. And now I'm in many ways interested in going back and now looking at the bit that serves me the most, which is how do I raise kids in a thriving environment rather than, as lockdown has amplified and intensified, raising kids within a household environment where you're rushing here, there, and everywhere to get to this place on time, or having a challenge with the kids about whether they can learn this piece of online learning that they have to do for school and things like that. And what you're seeing amplified at the moment is the friction in terms of how fundamentally at the village level society isn't quite working. And so I'm passionate about making my life even easier. And to do that, I have to be held in a different way. So I'm very good at making my life on my own and easier. And in the middle, there's the village piece. And I think raising children in a village context, multi-generational context, as we're designed, is something that really is starting to surface as a passion for me. And that country changing thing, it's kind of being done. And Guernsey's and New Zealand's story and many other places that regenerated so much faster during this process will start to tell the story of cohesion matters. And if you invest in it, you get different outcomes, and you change politics not through voting another person in an election. You change politics by reweaving the social fabric back together. And then you think, what happens in a country like New Zealand? Jacinda Ardern would never be elected in the UK. She wouldn't even get to the start line. And so you've got to ask what the culture is that produces leaders, and how do you go through the mechanism of changing the culture. And so, we've got amazing leadership in this community. I think cohesion has a role in hacking culture to produce different leaders. But like Kenya, in the Rift Valley created loads of runners, and in Jamaica there's loads of sprinters. I think, or Silicon Valley, there's loads of entrepreneurs. I think in Guernsey there's loads of change makers, a massive ecosystem of change makers that was built here in the last 6 years. And so when you start to understand what is the mechanism for creating an ecosystem of talent, in inverted commas, and as is quality of life, social talent, it can be built from the bottom up.
Absolutely. I mean, I think just to reflect on some of what you were just sharing about COVID, and both of us have got three young kids. One of the things I've loved the most is actually that opportunity to be with my kids, really be with them. And sometimes it's been challenging, and I've had to relearn stuff that I'd never really learned the first time around through education. So that's been trying, and I fell into it in the end and really started to really love it, especially my middle daughter, who's just junior school to senior school in my terms. Don't know what they call it these days. I'm still confused with the numbers and the way that they do it, but whereas my eldest, who's just about to start GCSEs, just didn't need me. It was all online. It was there, and she's like, actually, I learn with my friends best, Dad. I don't need you. And yeah, I have a tutor to help me.
But that's the point.
But what I did love, yeah, completely. But what I did love was that that opportunity for us as a family to come together. And so I just to sort of talk about COVID, I think part of what I've personally experienced, and also I've seen, is what people talk about existential crisis, and then they talk about existential opportunity, and I think that we're starting to awaken to what's the gift of COVID, and I'm really hoping like that part of that is some of the things that you're talking about. So better cohesion, social fabric, more meaning, contribution, purpose, a sense of we're part of a global village, not just our little village, our little town village, but actually the shit that we're dealing with in this world, and what's left on this little blue-green marble in the universal soup, is that we've got to do stuff differently, and human consciousness is a massive part of that. And we both share that as a passion. And I'm hoping that in COVID that awakening does happen. And then it's not just short term, actually it's longer term. Actually, we start to really make some fundamental shifts in the systems that we need to do. So we'll get to that in a minute. I just want to talk one final piece, and I love the humility you've got around this, and with Jock and everything else, and that you like being the sort of an invisible hand in some ways. You were visible a bit, but you like being the invisible hand, and I love that about you.
Well, being visible hand is hard work, right?
But I mean, slap yourself around the face, as I often do.
I'm invisible because it's easier. Right?
It's exactly. I don't want to do that work. I mean, and it kind of gets into a subject that I want to bring up in a minute around Ikigai, which you mentioned at the very beginning. I do want to bring that up because I think it's fascinating, your take on that. But are you, when you reflect on it, and not you, I know, because you're part of the we, the us, and the our, and you're a catalyst. I absolutely understand that, and you're not attached to it. But are you proud of what the community has done? Are you proud of what Dandelion has done?
I think every container, and I call it a container, that I've ever created, there's one thing having a vision for it, and there's a totally different thing living through it. And at the start of Dandelion, I had this vision for what was possible and really held on to that energy. But what's emerged, it's not that me's changed Guernsey, it's Guernsey's changed me and the people in it. And I think I never had any conception of how extraordinary and how beautiful and how incredible people are here. And what's emerged here and continues to emerge here blows my heart open every day. And so this community has every reason to feel very, very proud of itself right now. It worked, very hard and very creatively as a collective, and we are reaping the dividend of that. And I stand, sit on my rocking chair and in lockdown, just like, wow, I probably underestimated you, and I held a big flame, and I think we phenomenally underestimate how incredible the human race can be, and what amazing innovation we've seen in COVID, and what beauty and stuff is just around the corner. And I'm, at some levels, from what I see here, just so profoundly hopeful for what humanity can be, because I see it and feel it and live it every day in this place. And so, yeah, you're right. My heart bursts open as I see what this community has done. And I suppose, my gift is all I really see in people is the potential they can't see in themselves. And and it's what draws you to the work, and it draws me as well. And and I suppose I can see potential in community and potential in the world, and I can sit in the essence, but every time I see it unfold, it just blows me away.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So now let's get into a sort of a moment that, as I started to research this, obviously I knew slightly the story of the kind of Ikigai, and I always knew, actually it kind of really did originate from something from you, but I never really paid any attention to it, I'll be honest. I just went, oh yeah, I know Mark was involved in that, and I love the model and blah blah blah, and my company is called Arete, and that is the Latin of to be your best and to reach your potential. It kind of runs deep in both of us, that sense of how can I reach my potential, but more importantly, definitely where I think we're both at is actually how do we support others? How do we support others to really fulfill their potential? And for no one to know that. I mean, I love that about you. I've always loved that about you. And what I've also loved about you is your crazy vision. Like, it's just, and what I really love is when I start seeing it come true. It's like, no, he was right. I mean, sometimes I'm like, what the is this guy on? It's like, I remember some of those early days I met you. So the Ikigai moment, because I went through and I've listened to another podcast and I've read a couple of bits. Just take us through it, because I just, what did you say earlier? You said something really wonderful. I wrote it down here. I'm just trying to find where it is. Oh, here we go. Yeah, 45 minutes of my life has had more global impact. It's like, so just tell that story and explain what Ikigai is, because some people won't know the model of purpose, but tell the story of what happened and how it's just gone boom. Like, it's crazy.
Well, I mean, yeah, I set up this blog called The View Inside Me, and I 4 or 5 years, I can't remember, I just set up a weekly practice that whatever happened, I would write a blog post every week, and to be a view inside me. And it was really around, the vision of the blog was to write something that someone with no time would still read. And it was a little drip feed of once a week, just a little nugget, a system shift, and it just synthesized something into a simple point. So the essence of the blog was just these little simple weekly, one pages. And I made it as simple as possible for me. So I had an editor, and my assistant Jane did all of the running around, and she organized the cartoonist that would do a cartoon and things like that. And it was really powerful, reflective process that every week I had to find just an hour or 45 minutes and just write something, and then my editor would go in the next day and make it look good. My cartoonist would pick up the thing, and then my assistant would post it to the world. But actually, I always had the value of the blog before I'd sent it, right? And the week before I'd post something, what was coming up in the conversation would end up being. And the week after, because I'd send the blog to everyone I knew, I'd start reflecting on some of those thoughts in the conversations, because half the conversations they'd have read it and they would challenge me on something of it and things like that. So it became this really interesting thing to accelerate my learning, as I described. And so it was really just this learn as you go and share what you learn. kind of weekly process that was made as easy as possible so it didn't, become a chore. And ironically, weekly became a chore because I stopped doing it because it's like, this has become an effort now. And the process, the learning curve that it created, for 4 or 5 years, which for me to stick at something for 4 or 5 years is quite impressive. Even that well outsourced. One of these blog posts, I'd seen this diagram on purpose, which was I spent as little time as it. Whenever I'm told to describe it, I can't even remember what the circles are.
Don't worry.
This is the part of the embarrassment. I'd seen this diagram on purpose, which had concentric circles in. And purpose was the intersection on this diagram of what you love versus what you're good at versus what you can get paid for, and I forget what the fourth one is. I always forget one when I'm asked to explain it because and then I remember the TED talk on there you go, that which you're paid for, that which the world needs, that was the fourth one. And I saw it, and then I because I was fascinated by health and community health and things like that. What I saw was the TED talk on how to live to 100 plus, where he described what are all the places in the world that have extraordinary life expectancy and have the most centenarians in the world. And they talked about this concept of Ikigai in the Okinawans, which is this place in Japan where lots of people live to over 100. And I was like, and it's a reason to get up in the morning. And it was really understanding that when we talked about health, and bearing in mind my background was health, how do we deal with chronic disease, which health supplements and stuff we were talking about, proactive versions of healthcare, when I started to realize that the healthiest people were the ones that had purpose. I became fascinated in, how do we get people to find purpose?
Yep.
And so really I just, in a blog post as my weekly reflections, just link the two concepts together, right? A little synthesis of changing one word on that diagram, which had purpose in from this Spanish author or something at some corner of the internet, and then changed the word, and I wrote the reflection of Ikigai and longevity and people of Okinawa and living to 100, but did it in the frame of this purpose diagram, changed one word on the diagram, posted it like I do every week, thought nothing of it. Didn't. It was just part of my weekly process, sent to my people I met. And then, I don't know when I noticed. I think within 6 months where you hear someone else had grabbed the diagram and then adapted it themselves and started sharing it. And then, you look at the search terms.
Yeah.
If you ever want to go into Google Trends and you look at the search terms and things like that, you just see this exponential path of people searching for Ikigai. And this diagram, which remember I'd only changed one word on, started appearing more and more on Facebook and things like that as people started to write more and more blogs about it. And somehow, for some reason, and I've had many conversations about this with people about what is the essence of a good meme. I said, if I knew, I'd be really wealthy. And it just, I suppose, like hygge in the Danish concept, there's something about a different word that captures something in a better way. Purpose, it doesn't feel that exotic, but Ikigai, there's some reason for it. And so in some ways it captured people. And then, it's just been crazy. And because, so I get asked all the time, can I have permission to use the diagram to go in this book or this course or this thing? And I'm like, I don't really feel it's my permission to give, but permission granted. On you go. And I was speaking to one of the authors who wrote the book Ikigai, Hector Garcia, which my diagram's in the front page of. Yeah. And he sold 2 million copies, and there's literally dozens of books. But the interesting thing about it, and like the World Economic Forum were sharing it, there's university programs on it. There's and it builds and builds and explodes and explodes and explodes. Yeah. And literally, the most powerful thing about it is some people can just see that diagram and their life changes in a moment. Like a coaching session can change a life, but this is even more extraordinary. Just seeing that framework on a meme shared on Facebook, on Twitter, can fundamentally alter the course of people's directions. And so why, it's been seen and by hundreds of millions of people, I think, but it's also that meme or diagram coming into people's consciousness has literally changed tens of thousands of people's lives. Who knows, more indirectly by people who've been inspired to live life of purpose. So it's a very strange thing, because to let that in, because I get emails all the time of the stories of how that diagram changed people's lives, and even speaking with the authors or course creators, I reach out to them every morning and just tell them the story. I'd love to hear more about it. I was speaking to someone who set up Ikigai coaching program, an Ikigai coaching qualification, and a card game a couple of days ago, and it's just like amazing, right? What was your story and how did it come about? And it just has this way of getting people to jump off the cliff, right? Into their truth. And it keeps going and going and going. And it's in some ways I find it hard to let that in, and what it means. And I think a lot of coaches have, or mentors, or people who support others, really to I mean, there's the dismissive side of me that looks at it as a kind of a joke, and I use it to say it was just 45 minutes. And whenever I'm working too hard, I remind myself that that it's an act of creativity that creates impact, not effort, right? And so for me, it's always a great anchor to remind myself that when I'm trying too hard to do something, there is an easier way. And that's certainly the story I tell and the lesson I tell. But I also, have to live with the fact that piece of work, that essence, that creation, has impacted an extraordinary amount of people's lives. And I probably do hold that too lightly and not let that in, because if I let that in, I have to feel even better about myself. And that's quite a hard thing for Brits and Western people to do, is to let that sense of you could die tomorrow and you've given more than you've taken from the world, and to find a deeper meaning when you've already made that kind of impact it's interesting, right? It has so the motivation has to come from something deep. So I don't know. I mean, it really leaves me in a really interesting inquiry, because people say, Mark, you've got to do something with it. You got to do. And I'm like, no, it's magic. It's deep magic for me as an artist in my artist frame, right?
Yeah.
Not in the doer. It is in the story of 45 minutes. And if I never did anything on it again, I think it's myth of the hard workers, or just to challenge the notion of hard work. I'm just not saying I say it's not necessary, but to tell the story of how you can make a massive difference in a moment of ingenuity or creation, I think is a good story to tell. And that's the kind of position I like to hold in it. And certainly with all the people I, spend time with having coffee, and when we're sitting down and we're trying to shift struggle into ease, I think it serves as a really playful challenge to, the hustle porn that exists in the struggle.
Yeah.
The story of life has to be a struggle.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think, beyond COVID and beyond all this, what is the world we're trying to move towards? The beach. The world is the beach in that fisherman's tale, right? There has to be a narrative around ease. And that was a weekly blog post that I'd mostly outsourced, a stroke of insight that I just waffled on about, that actually my editor probably wrote half of it. And it turned into something. And like Dandelion was hanging out, having coffee to do nothing on a Monday, right? I think if we're ever going to get to the beach, we've got to live that joyous life, or the village. We've got to understand the power of the void.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get you and ask you to go into that space in a minute. I just want to sort of share some of my reflections on it, because I think you're doing a disservice to yourself on some levels, and I love the fact that you also just want to see the impact, because I think we talk about moments in life that change you forever, and sort of I've put on record at your TEDx the moment in life that changed my life forever, and hopefully something positive emerged from that, and that was Mo. That was the manifestation of in that moment. So I think that yours was a real moment of inspiration, and I think it wasn't 45 minutes. Actually, that was your life's work. That was a culmination of your life's work, Mark. All the things that you've experienced and done, the life experiences you've grown up, which I hadn't heard a whole load of them, and I'm listening to them today, and I'm joining dots, on a incredible level in my head as I listen to. Oh, this is partly why Mark does what he does, because for me that was one of those magical moments when all of you and all the essence of you kind of collided those worlds, and you bought that. It's called the Blue Zone, isn't it? The people that live over 100, because you also set up that health platform, didn't you? That I came to as well. But that was an inspirational moment.
The first country to break the 100-year life expectancy barrier, right?
Yeah. I mean, so there's another story that we've not even gone down, another massive avenue, right? But we might dwell in that one in a minute.
But that needs the village, yeah.
I think it's really important is like, actually don't, and again, pragmatic is that sometimes people say to me, well, how do I price what I do? Because I've always in that world, when I was working in that sense, I priced myself at a premium level, because I said, actually, this is my life's work. This is not an hour of my time. This is my life's work. And I think when you put that pen to paper or typed on that keyboard, that was your life's work in that moment. And it's no surprise to me that Ikigai has just gone boom. And it is incredible to see, because I did go and have a look around, and just, it's fascinating. It is like when you're
I'm dining out. I'm having my dividend, right? Because it's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, as just the personal joy I receive from that is extraordinary.
But when you've got a narrative around, you want life to be ease and fulfilling, and you want to just do and it's like, there we go. Here's an example of a man has sat down and done something with ease. Didn't even know, wasn't even conscious of there was an agenda to it. He was just being, and he was just writing something that he was reflecting on, because I'm a big fan of journaling and personal and professional reflective practice, and that's part of what you were doing. And that's just so magical, isn't it? So magical.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 400 blog posts, right?
Yeah.
And as I said, it was probably one of the few things that I stuck out for a significant period of time. But yeah, I mean, it was structured around ease, and mostly, although some of those weeks it felt stiff. But yeah, you're right. The ability to download that idea, that thing comes from, I would say, many lifetimes of perspective, and everybody that's connected with me during my lifetime, right? And so. Yeah, but it's also why, I think we can afford to be patient in life, and just trust that, there's good habits of being true to yourself. I would say being true to yourself in small ways over a long period of time, those moments of magic will appear. And even if you only do it for 1 minute a day or 45 minutes a week, over a decade, you can create a huge divergence. And so, I've never really worked hard. But I've always managed to give a bit of time each day to the long-term important things that don't feel urgent today. And I think that's why I succeed, I think, is that I can question the day-to-day noise and put a tiny bit of effort into the long term, be it learning or reflecting. I don't do too much in the day-to-day noise, but my skill is the capacity to kind of relentlessly take steps towards the long term, and kind of high leverage steps. And a weekly public reflective practice, if someone reflected and coffeed with the number of people that I coffeed with, and the diversity of the people that I coffeed with, and work reflective practice 400 times, something out of that was likely to emerge. Maybe not in the way you could predict, but it was a container of thousands of coffees with some of the most interesting people in the world, whilst traveling to some of the most interesting places, with a highly questioning individual that had been through a story of creating questions. Yes, there's going to be a harvest from that process somehow. And I think, but it's interesting to see what it was. And I think that's the point. The point is, you can't predict, right? And we're so much about is planning and predicting, rather than just trying to just do the right things over a long period of time, right?
Yeah.
Be you over a long period of time. Something will arrive, right? So it's like kind of a just good habit of constantly navigating to who I am and creating the process to do that and being who I am, which is having coffee with lots of interesting people and having great conversations like this, and trusting that that will lead to something, and not needing to know what.
Yeah. When you think about when you bring yourself up to where you are today, where and hopefully, I use that word now, I'm thinking, oh gosh, now what's Mark going to say when I've used the word hopefully? But COVID, we're emerging out with the vaccines rolling out, so the world will start to get its liberty back and open in some ways. But you can then argue, well, actually, you've always had liberty. So I can see that mischievous smile.
Nelson would say,
yeah, exactly.
In his 20 years of solitary confinement, the long walk to freedom.
So when you think about love and you think about purpose and you think about it takes a village to raise a child, and connection and social fabric and all of those pieces that you've talked about, and your ability to see systems and hack systems, where what do you see right now? What's the essence that you're seeing or feeling within yourself right now?
Or about the future, or
now and future? Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I felt reasonably adrift in the last year, and so a lot of it has been facing the restlessness and facing the boredom, and just continually using lockdown and the fact that 6 years of my life is over. I see this with entrepreneurs that sell a lot, is they go into this period of, or that finish a large project, or you're in a transition point as well, and there's this rudderlessness that comes with periods of transition. And I suppose this time I'm taking the opportunity to really deepen into the feelings that come up with that rudderlessness, that knowing when the next wave arrives, and there's always waves, like COVID is a wave.
Yep.
I've been building surfboards.
Yep.
In a chilled out way during that time. So, what am I doing? Chipping away at the surfboard day to day, metaphorically, knowing that the Ikigai wave or the COVID wave or the coffee wave or the next thing will arrive, and I'll just jump on it when it comes. And so I'm not really in that process of trying to conjure something. I'm in the process of just chipping away at the surfboards, as my blog was just chipping away at surfboards, trusting that when the sea comes up again, there'll be a wave for me to surf on. And people who have not prepared building surfboards for the waves, get taken by the waves and it rolls, and it's a big struggle, like COVID has been for many people. I was sat in a jacuzzi for half a month. Please feel free. The Zoom car crashing is the most kitsch COVID thing. Zoom crashing is. It's like that BBC news guy. That was a time traveler from 2020, I think. That person was described. So I'm trying not to get into the restless space of wanting to conjure something, because it's a period that feels uncomfortable because of the constraint. If someone used to travel all around the world, I've not left the island for over a year, and we've been in another lockdown recently. So those restless tensions. So yeah, I know. I mean, I think of the body of work I've created in the last 10, 12 years. It's becoming more relevant every day as each new wave arrives. So it's really around, how do I build surfboards that support me to be held by a village? So as they talk about people building new cities or new villages, the people investing in that, probably like investing Bitcoin in 2012, because people are going to want to live in a different way. And I bought Bitcoin in 2013, so I have this capacity to understand waves and ride them. So I see the world going into festival mode in the next 10, 20 years. And I'm probably someone who's going to start living that way now. By sitting on the beach and living in permanent festival, and creating something attractive for people to move towards that isn't restless.
It's genuinely, that's part of what you're anticipating and seeing, is that sense of festival and beach living. And
well, I mean, the sense of, we at some point, the globe moving from scarcity to abundance, when we fundamentally have everything we need because of all this technological innovation, a bit like the fisherman or the retired successful poet. What are we going to do when we have everything we need?
Yeah,
as a planet, when everybody has enough food, shelter, love, connection, then what? And so I think it's a I think we spend too much time focused on the deficits and the problems, and not enough time building the aspiration.
Yeah.
Of what does the world look and feel like? What is the apple of villages?
Mm-hmm.
The apple of fishing villages, right? How do you make fishing more desirable?
Yeah.
As the thing we live for, which is the thing you do as your part-time thing to escape, but you love it more than anything.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you're like, can I just give you permission to just fish?
I think my wife would probably challenge that view. Rightly so.
But that's the point, right? There's some tension, right? Or can I teach my kids to fish?
I'd love to do that, but they're not interested. That's all good.
Right, no, but someone in the village will be. Someone of the village will be, and someone who's passionate about the things your kids are interested in will be passionate about.
Yeah.
So you take the 10 kids that are passionate about fishing and teach them how to fish, and the other member of the family.
No, Mark. Just to be clear, fishing is solitude.
I've had some great. I always thought it's a bit like golf,
Yeah.
Yeah, people, you can do it on your own, it's good.
Yeah.
You can do it with 2 or 3 people, it's very funny. But a group of boys fishing off the back of a boat, having a laugh together is a good practice as well as
boys or girls, we should say. Yeah.
Yes. Although there's a story about men's groups and men's mental health, like Men's Shed and things like that. So there is, I think, I will push back on some of the things we're losing and tribal constructs that we're losing is and we have to question some of that. And certainly we're seeing that men need to gather for good mental health in certain ways, and so that doesn't mean that we shouldn't empower all the women around us. And as a father of a daughter, I'm acutely aware of that, but also as a father of 2 boys and seeing the decline of men's mental health in particular, one has to challenge the notion of it needing to be, everybody has a right to be in every space.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, we, if you look at the things like Men's Shed or Man Club in this community, which are really about giving men a place to talk to each other, shoulder to shoulder, there are projects that can create human thriving that are necessary as single sex. That does not preclude women from being massively empowered in this world. And in fact, actually, men talking to each other shoulder to shoulder is the sort of thing that's going to stop this overly wounded masculine world existing. So in many ways, the things that we require men to be with each other in deeper conversations. It's a little deviation.
No, and I think it's a really important one. I think a couple of points there. First off, one of the things that we haven't picked up on is one of our conversations early doors. Mo was known as Ministry of Entrepreneurship, and you came up with Ministry of Empowerment. And I went and bought that domain, and we've never used it, but I went and bought the domain because I was like, Mark's bang on, because at the essence of Mo, it's about people empowering, self-empowering, and you pick that up more quickly than I did. I think also, just to kind of acknowledge it and put it on record, is that it's so funny. I was in a podcast call the other day, and I was talking to an academic, and he name-checked someone else, and he said, in their article they wrote last year, they talked about democratizing coaching. And I didn't bother to say, but I can on this one. It's like, that's so funny, because at the TEDx, I talked about democratizing coaching. And the reason I said that was because you said that to me just before I went on stage. And I went, Mark's bang on again. I'm going to use that phrase, because that's absolutely what we're trying to do, is we're trying to give the gift of coaching to as many people as possible, for the very reasons we've been talking about here. So I just wanted to acknowledge those pieces. And I think just to talk about mental health, because, I had my own experience of mental health challenge last year, and I've not spoken about this or shared this with anyone other than my family. And it was a real crisis of meaning moment for me. It really was. And it was a real, took me to bedrock in my life.
COVID at its best, isn't it?
It was, and I'm so glad for it, because I learned so much about myself. And I've never experienced, I'm up and down like a freaking fiddler's yo-yo, because I'm a creative, and most creatives are, and entrepreneurial types, creative types are, and imaginative types are. But this was something different. This was like actually going to the bedrock of my soul. It really was about, who the fuck are you? It's like, it really was that serious. It's like, who are you, and what matters to you? And I had to rebuild. Last year was a real sort of hit bedrock, not once, not twice, but probably 3 or 4 times, and actually finally then hit bedrock in myself. And I did think about Man's Club. I've got to be honest, I did think about that, but I'm not a person that finds it easy as a man to go and talk about myself or my own feelings. You know, my role is to be a provider. My role is to support other people quietly and in the background. And suddenly I'm like, no, I'm grappling. I'm like, I haven't got something to hang on to the side of this bloody cliff or mountain that I'm on at the moment. And, you know, I'm struggling. And so that is really important. And one more comment I just want to say is when you were sort of talking about various different metaphors earlier, fishing is one of those things that is a bit like the times in previous times with tribes, is that we would sit around as a village, sit around a fire and have fireside chat. And that's part of why I wanted to do this series, because actually I miss those deeper fireside chats because I'm bored with the superficial. Actually, I want to have meaningful conversations that are about love and family and belonging and the ecological opportunities and crisis that we sounds like and it looks like we face as a humanity. And COVID has made us realize that our life can come to an end quite rapidly. Have we given a consideration to our role in nature's demise? And I'm hoping that we can start joining those deeper connection points and start to see what impact can we have, not just to make the world sustainable, but regenerative. So I just wanted to say that because I've never said it and it gives me an opportunity to say it. So mental health is really important, Mark, really important. And I'm glad you brought it up. And I'm really glad you brought up that piece around as an entrepreneur and as a kind of maverick and as a person that's a mischief maker and all those different identities you've talked about. I love the fact that you've also shared about that period of rudderlessness in between major big projects, because I experienced that. You know, I really experienced it. I've never heard anyone else say it, and I've never said it because I write stuff for myself. I'm not as brave as you. I don't share what I think. I don't give the view inside me like you have with all those blog posts. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and say that. So now go on your stream of consciousness about the importance of men talking and mental health.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it comes from being a fan of TED, and I always remember the talk, Brené Brown's talk around vulnerability being the key to connection, right? And I think not talking or not expressing is, you know, it's like a pressure cooker. It just builds up. I always say I was so good at being bipolar, I think no one found out. So, you know, there was always an unexpressed part of myself, which is, you know, always this expectation of being light and funny and mischievous. There was this part that I wasn't acknowledging or speaking to. And I think through the process of having thousands of conversations, you know, that's really all I do is what you described in that thing, is have meaningful conversations, because nothing else in my life feels as rich as that. So I just built a life where I'm living in a gold mine, which is spend day to day having every day 4 or 5 really deep and meaningful conversations. Some of them the record button is pressed, most of them it's not. And that's a wave to ride on. But to have really proper conversations, there needs to be mutuality. And I think why I kind of moved away from just coaching is because, you know, just holding space for others, I think, allowed me to hide. And I think a lot of people are drawn to coaching is because they've got some wound, or healing in any way. They've got some wound in some way. And so they're really drawn to it, but they still hide from truly expressing what's going on inside. And I think the emotional side of life, which men are particularly taught to suppress from a very young age, it feels terrifying, but to be honest, it isn't really that terrifying to talk about, you know, considering the generations before us used to have to go to war and things like that. If the worst thing we have to do these days is talk about our emotions or cry in front of someone, we're really not the warriors, right? So if we get it from the perspective of being able to express struggle as the warrior, because it takes strength to be able to just share what you shared. But, you know, I have it in the warrior mindset. I make it feel more manly to share, because that is the fear these days, is to step into a masculine or toxic masculine world and be emotional. But I'm a parent. You know, if I don't do it, my kids are going to bottle up their emotions, and because they'll model my behavior if I can't express, or, you know, when I've had an argument, you know, start to model the behaviors of things. And you know, my parents had struggles with their emotions and stuff growing up, and that led to behaviors and things like that. And so it's like you either do it or it continues down the generations. And so I'm not that brave, really, by comparison of someone, the stiff upper lip Brit who would go into a machine gun on a beach. But that's what suppressing the emotions allowed them to do.
Mm.
But to solve climate change, when you can feel emotion, you can feel nature, you can feel the world around me. And so we have to be able to express the deep emotion within ourselves. Otherwise, we can't connect to anything, truly.
Yeah.
And so to connect to nature and to connect to the world around us, we need to be able to connect to ourselves, because the body wisdom and the body intelligence, our intuition, these are the things we used to use as hunters to sense into nature and everything else. And because of going to war and all of these things, we taught to suppress their emotions because you don't want people chickening out. So culturally, we've got to suppress. But once we realize that the way to solve climate change, like mass overconsumption, is people suppressing emotion. The link between mental health and climate change is fundamental. If we are over-consuming, we are unhappy about something. Until we go through the pain, acknowledge it, and no longer eat our way through it, or drink our way through it, or get high, or build businesses our way through it, right? Whatever your addiction, right? And we start to truly sit within that motion, then nature reveals itself to us, because we're into our body. Whereas that highly tuned emotional thing that we as hunters in the hunter-gatherer tribes used to use, in that deep intuition, that able to sense and feel and know where the prey is and all of these kind of things, that's an in-body wisdom experience. But we're so shut off from our bodies because we don't want to feel anything in it, and our disconnection from nature and our disconnection from our feelings is part of that. And so the reason why I got really passionate about solving mental health in Guernsey is because I saw climate change as a mental health issue. I'm a very contrarian. And why I work in a tax haven is because I saw you can't solve poverty until you alleviate wealth.
Yep.
And so I work at everyone trying to rescue the planet, but not looking at themselves, or everyone trying to solve poverty, but not looking at where the inequality comes from. And as someone who's lazy, I just look at, everyone talks about the 10 richest people in the world having more. Well, I said, well, that seems like a 10 coffee problem to solve poverty, rather than, and how do you get those 10 people to feel like they're enough? Because when they feel enough and can sit and fish, maybe they can let go of all of these resources they have. And when you start to see many of the behaviors that are going on in the world at scale, and you start to see the connection between our individual behaviors and our individual crises and the individual bits that we're taught to ignore or not reflect on, very different approaches start to emerge in terms of how to foster the transition. And so, how do we love ourselves enough to be the fisherman today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you look at that broader system and the picture that you paint, we know there's massive inequalities in the world, and there still are. What are some of the things that you see that we need to, from a conscious perspective, a human psyche perspective? What do you think are some of the things that we need to do? I mean, I can't remember the phrase of it. I'm trying to remember it, but the universal pay, where everyone earns a similar baseline. Yeah. So we've tried some of those things. What's some of your views around some of those things that we're starting to test and play with? Because I think we've got to experiment, haven't we? We've got to find a better way. We know there's enough food in the world. We know there's enough wealth. We could live live sustainably as 7.6 billion people or whatever it is on this planet right now. Well, what are some of the things that you think we need to sort of face into as humanity and as human beings, individually and collectively as communities as well?
Well, I think it's this idea of mutual exchange, right? So we talk about inequality. So there's an inequality of wealth. There's also an inequality of joy. As I go back to growing up in Africa, I would say I'm deeply disturbed about how much joy Africa's been accumulating. They've not been distracted as much as we have, and they've been stealing all of the joy whilst we've been miserable pursuing another. So I like the idea of this mutual exchange. The people of the eagle and the people of the condor, which is the interesting thing, and there's a prophecy about how those two tribes will come together. And so there's this real thing about the indigenous people of the world who live in harmony with nature and all connected and things like that, but don't necessarily have some of the resources. And you've got the other people of the world that have all the resources. But what is interesting for me is how we facilitate the convergence of the two tribes in the world, the rational and the convergence of the mind with the heart and soul, and understanding that there are cultures and tribes and people that live in direct harmony with this planet. And they have so much to teach us. And likewise, we also have so much to teach them, and in shared listening and shared teaching. So for me, it really is around how do we support that convergence? All of the resources are there, all of the ideas there, all of the fun is waiting to erupt.
Yeah.
And all the joy is waiting to erupt. And how do we just collectively get out of the way and hear each other enough to allow that to unfold and cry the tears we need to cry and let go of what we need to let go of and surface and collectively emerge into something. How do we go as being, the caterpillar to the butterfly? There's a tense, liquidation process that we're going through as a human race right now. But, as a utopian, I like to, hold the energy that something extraordinary and beautiful is about to emerge. And if we all die in 10 years' time in dystopia, then I'd have at least had a good day every day until then.
Absolutely.
Whereas the people who believe in global collapse and dystopia would have been pretty miserable every day up till then. So there's no downside to believing in the butterfly.
No, absolutely. And then for you, it has your sort of coffee, has that moved into the virtual space like we are today? Is that what's happened for you in this past year, or have you been sort of stood back from having those wonderful, meaningful coffee conversations?
No, I mean, I did probably half my coffees on Zoom before COVID.
Right.
Because I have 3 kids, so I couldn't get on the plane and jump around as much as I used to. And so literally my life didn't change. It really didn't. But no, the coffee thing, actually, I have a journal coming out soon called the 50 Coffee Adventure, which I think I talked about 50 coffees at that life expectancy event, which is a viral game meme. Who starts the adventure is called to ask one question, which was, if anything was possible and I could only solve one thing in the world, what would it be? And intuitively, I've done this so many times, there's an answer that comes. So I'll ask you that question. If anything was possible in the world and you could only solve one problem, what would it be?
It's really simple for me. It's poverty mindset.
Right. So the journal then calls people, well, just announce it on social media or Facebook or anything like that and go and have 50 coffees about it. And within the journal, there's kind of 50 small reflections like blog posts, but even smaller than blog posts on I was paid a load of money to write a playbook on having coffee after I was paid to go on retreat. And I said, I can only do 50 small blog posts because then it's a rhythm that doesn't feel unreal. So there's a journal that's 50 small reflections and then 50 reflective diary entries around 50 coffees to go and ask a question.
Wonderful.
And so it's another meme. It's a journal meme, but it's self-coaching and village building journal that it's going to release into the world. And so I think what it'll hopefully do is give people the gift of learning what I've learned in the thousands of coffees and conversations that I have that can create meaning or purpose, is how do you deploy a process that anybody can start from nothing and ask that question and build the support around them to live into that truth or potential. So that is where I'm retiring from copying, because I've written the journal that anybody can do it and it doesn't need me. But interestingly, yeah, that came from I was literally paid to go and do nothing on retreat. There was this program that supported change makers, and then they gave me double what I asked to go and hang out and do nothing for a week. And then
wonderful.
And then they said, just write this playbook and don't have to do anything with it, but we'll just pay you to write it. And then someone gave me a journal called the 5-Minute Journal at that longevity conference. And I said, oh, look, you can sell a book for 3 times more if it's a journal, and you only have to write 30% of the content because people will fill it in. And then, yeah, in a coffee, a journal publisher came to me. And again, they gave me a free copy of the book and they did all the work on it without anything. And so there's a project that is another little side project. Side hustle is the wrong word, a side painting that's emerging out that allows, I think, other people to go on that mischievous coffee journey that I've been on. But I mean, all that coffee journey is how meaningful conversations can take you places. And it gives people an opportunity to do that. And I think double back and reflect on what Mo I think does, having watched so many people go through it, is teach people the art of meaningful conversation and give people community at the same time. And then that is a wave that takes people places.
No, absolutely. And as part of, someone that's very much, from my perspective, part of the fabric and the construct of Mo, you've influenced it in ways that probably for the first time ever I've acknowledged to anyone, but to yourself as well. You and I have never had those conversations, but I always, every time I went to the Rock, one of the things I always looked forward to was our coffee morning, where we'd spend a couple of hours just shooting.
Or in the pub.
Or in the pub. Yeah, that was less conversation at that point, though. That was more just joy and laughter and festival. I think that was, for me, I always really did and do, and I look forward to that moment when I can do it again. Those coffee moments that we would have, where we would talk about the things that we're talking about here today. And you have been part of the kind of architecture and superstructure and infrastructure of that community, and you've influenced it in lots of ways. So what's your message to the Mo community? What do you have? There's messages all the way through this, but is there something, a wish for it, or something, as you look out to the future, where you go, actually, Mo, this community that we're building, we're co-creating with all the other people that are part of it as well. Is there a message for them? Is there something you'd love to sort of share or say as we sort of come to the end of this phase of this podcast?
It's extraordinary. I've always seen so much potential in it, and kind of why I've always spoken to it. And so I think the question is, for Mo community is, how can it get out of its own way enough to truly live into its viral potential to spread listening and self-reflection, right? And COVID has helped it in some ways because it's gone virtual, and like many organizations, it's having to get out of its own way because the physical world is gone. And so what's the idea of MoCoin or something like that like a crypto purpose engine that scales to 1 billion frictionlessly, and everybody does Mo gets 300 quid for their time, or 300 Mo coins for their time, and so it gamifies purpose. And so it's like, how do you start to realize that it isn't really about it is about the people, but it also isn't. How does this scale while you're fishing? And because we've seen it scale in Guernsey, right? It works with the virus. And so my wish for it would be, how can it become even more infectious? I'd like to see a even more transmissible Mo variant.
Love that.
So I would say, and that really is, for me, transmissibility and ego are linked. It's how do we soften the ego of Mo and move into the transmissibility and getting out of the way and letting Mo move frictionlessly, or I would say beyond Mo, the act of listening and finding purpose. How do we get that to move even more frictionlessly throughout the world?
Wonderful. Well, what a lovely sort of subtle but lovely way to kind of calm the energy and end our conversation. No, that was lovely. That was unexpected and lovely.
That always arrives at the end, something.
Yeah. No, that was really beautiful, actually. And I think I'm certainly going to listen back to that part, and all of it, as I always do with these as I'm learning. And it feels like one of the things I love about what you helped us co-create in Guernsey is that sense that you've been mowed. And I feel like I've been mowed by you. I've been mowed down at the end there by you. So I'm quashing that ego as much as I can. We're at time. So look, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time.
All right. Take care, buddy.
Take care. See you soon.
Now, this is a message for anybody who thinks that life coaching might be the right calling for you, but you're not sure how to attract new clients. So on the 17th of April, we will be having our next Mo Digital Academy. Keely Vuong White, the founder of Kia Ora Coaching, is going to be talking to us about how to attract clients as a new life coach, a 90-minute long introduction to marketing. Now, she's had a fantastic life and has spent 15 years in international corporate marketing and has also learned a thing or two about setting up a business. And she's also done her coaching with the Mo Foundation. So she's going to be running a fantastic workshop. We hope to see you there. If you're interested and you'd like to register, then please find more information on our website. That's mofoundation.com/calendar. Thanks so much, and we will see you there.